2. Life and Virtues of the Blessed Virgin Mary, from the birth of her divine Son, Jesus, to his death. Chapter 7. Love and Esteem of Humiliations. My God, observance of the law of purification must have meant a deep humiliation for your Holy Mother, for that law was meant only for ordinary mothers. The bright virginity for which she showed herself so solicitous at the Annunciation was in a sense obscured in this religious ceremony. But she knew that shame and humiliation would one day be your own lot, and she was happy to be able to resemble you. The more you set her apart from other women, the more she wanted to be lost among them and to hide her special privileges. A soul that, like Mary, seeks only to please God, takes little account of esteem from men, and is not greatly responsive to their homage. One of your prophets says it is better to be a lowly servant in the Lord's house than to have all the pomp and splendor with which the children of this world surround themselves. Virtue, in fact, safer in a lowly, humble condition than amid honors and distinctions. If it is unknown and hidden from the eyes of man, it is all the more resplendent in God's sight. True virtue alone has a claim on God's attention. If it is unknown to men and even scorned by them, it regards itself as all the more fortunate. Providence that watches over the just often leads them by the path of humiliation to the goal of glorious reward. Self-love undoubtedly suffers when we are humiliated, but the humiliation is only the more salutary for that reason. The saints thanked God for the insults they suffered as for a special grace. If I do not feel the same way, it is because I am still a wholly earthly and fleshly man and therefore do not seek God. Many saints have asked God for great humiliations because their desire of perfection was great. If I do not have the same courage, let me at least accept submissively the humiliations he sends me for my good. I can honor the Lord more through a humiliation accepted with resignation to his will than through even the sublimest gift. The Son of God humbled himself. The Apostle tells us even to the point of emptying himself, Philemon 2:7. That is the model I must try to imitate. To have a horror of humiliation is to have a horror for the resemblance to Jesus, which humiliation can give. If God allows me many humiliations, it is because he wants to make the image of his Son perfect in me. I ought to accept a humiliation with the same pleasure and gratitude I would have if I received a piece of the very cross of Jesus. Chapter 8. How to offer the sacrifices God asks of us. The offering which mothers made of their firstborn sons to God in the temple was but a small thing. However, your offering of Jesus, Holy Virgin, was a true sacrifice. You knew that someday he would sacrifice his life for the salvation of man. Therefore, you offered him now as a victim, just as he had already offered himself to the eternal Father. The event in the temple was the beginning of sufferings that would last to the dying breath of Jesus. Your soul would begin at that moment to be pierced with the sword of sorrow, Luke 2:35, of which Simeon spoke to you as you held Jesus in his arms. The mothers of this world love their children, but the latter are not given all their mother's affection. How much affection these women reserve for empty things! How much for themselves! But you loved Jesus with all your power of loving. You loved him with your whole heart, and you loved him alone. He was your only son. You had hardly begun to taste the joy of being a mother, and the mother of such a son, when the day came for you to go and offer him to his divine Father. and you went. Worthy daughter of Abraham and heir to his faith, you suppressed all your natural feelings and listened only to the voice of God, who wanted you to sacrifice what was dearest to you in this world. Mary, my child, be persevering and generous like me when God asks anything of you, no matter what it may be. He asked me to sacrifice what I loved the most. Yet what does he ordinarily ask of you? Only the sacrifice of what you ought to hate. If you love God, generosity should be the main proof of your love. A heart that is mean and niggardly does not know what it means to love. If you are unwilling to do anything difficult for God, if you lose heart at the sight of difficulties to be surmounted, can you be said to love? True love proves itself in pain and conflict. Inability to suffer is incompatible with the outlook and practice of an authentic follower of Jesus. Do you want to please the Lord with your sacrifices? Then offer them promptly and without inquiring what they will cost you. The world asks harder sacrifices of its disciples, yet it need only speak and they obey immediately and completely. Is God to be the only Lord to whom no one is willing to offer sacrifice without first inquiring whether he is asking too much? My child, we have but little love for God if we put limits to the proofs our love is willing to give. In the world, a person who acts solely according to whim and loves only when it suits his interests would nonetheless not dare show a heart such as most Christians dare not offer God. A son who does only what his father absolutely requires, a wife who is not interested in pleasing her husband when pleasing him makes demands on her, do such people show a sincere and acceptable love? God is infinitely good to all his creatures, but he is also a jealous God. Nehemiah 1:2. He is not served as he requires and deserves to be served unless he is served with a heart perfectly submissive to his every wish. Be ashamed, then, to be so slow in his service. Be ashamed to do so little for him when he has done so much for you. Do you find that he gives you orders sometimes difficult to carry out? My child, he will give you other such orders, for you must earn his rewards. Prosperity, rest, reputation, health, life itself, all these he may ask of you, for he has a right to them all. Do not be surprised that the more you give him, the more he will ask of you. He does this in order to prepare you for greater favors during your time on earth and to enable you to receive greater rewards in heaven. Chapter 9, Dispositions of Soul in Time of Trial. Mary, my child, why do you weep and sigh? The Believer. Queen of Saints, I was just beginning to enjoy some little tranquility when suddenly I found myself troubled anew. Injustice, calumny, and ingratitude were plotting against me once more. Loving Mother, give this child of yours your help and protection. Mary, my child, your state is somewhat like mine when I heard Simeon's prophecy there in the temple. After telling me of Jesus' future greatness, he predicted that he would meet opposition and persecution, and that a sword of sorrow would pierce my heart. Luke 2:34-33. Thus, I would share the difficulties my son would have to bear. I was very familiar with Scripture, with the sufferings that would be Jesus' lot. Abel murdered, Joseph sold into slavery, David persecuted, and the Paschal Lamb were all figures foretelling what would befall him. What bitter grief I felt at the sufferings and death of Jesus, which were always in my thoughts. How I groaned within me when I held Jesus to my breast and thought of the cruel death by which he must save the world. If I saw a lamb being slaughtered in the temple or a dove being sacrificed, I said to myself, that is how Jesus will someday be offered. The Believer. Virgin Mother, I glimpse how painful your state of mind must have been, and why the Church rightfully calls you Queen of Martyrs. The martyrs were decapitated, exposed to wild animals, or perished by water or fire, but their torments were usually short, whereas yours lasted 33 years. And during that whole lifetime, filled with a courage and strength greater than those of all the martyrs, you heroically contemplated the ever-new sufferings God was preparing for you, and especially those you must someday endure on Calvary. As for me, I am weakness itself and entirely cowardly before the evils that threaten me. If your suffering was constantly renewed as you thought of the torments Jesus must undergo, you also continually renewed the first sacrificial offering you had made in the temple. Your soul was weighed down by deep sadness, yet your peace was undisturbed. In perfect submission, you wanted whatever God wanted. I, on the contrary, am frightened at the very thought of the new crosses he has in store for me. No more peace and tranquility for me. My spirit rebels and my heart complains. Mary, my child, God will not allow you to be tempted, tested, or tormented beyond your strength. His help will always be equal to the trial he sends. Give heed to his grace, for it already speaks to you, and respond to his inspirations. If God has more crosses in store for someone, he gives greater graces that that person may bear them. Crosses are the most precious gifts God can give his creature, and the creature's acceptance of them is the most pleasing sacrifice it can offer its creator. If the crosses he intends for you are heavy, that means he has great plans for your sanctification. Do you want to prevent those divine plans being fulfilled? Your disturbance and fears will not take the crosses from you. Whatever you do, you must carry them. What then is the wiser thing for you to do? It is to submit, my child, to all that God bids you do. You must say, the Lord is master. Let him do with me as he thinks best. Luke 1:38. Then you will see God moved by your submission. Faithfulness to his promises, he will make lighter than you thought possible the crosses which from a distance seemed so heavy. He will make them so light that you will say, just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so too through Christ do we receive consolation in equal measure. 2 Corinthians 1:5. The Believer. Thank you, Holy Mother, for the instruction you give me. It will strengthen me in my weakness. It is you who obtain for me the new energy I feel within me for facing courageously the crosses I could not think of without trembling. Praised be the Lord my God, who through the instructions of his Holy Mother readies my hand for the struggle and teaches me to endure a battle in which without such help I could not but be defeated. Chapter 10. How to Act in Face of God's Inscrutable Plans. God unexpectedly told Mary, through Joseph, to whom an angel had revealed it, that they must rescue the child Jesus from Herod's anger and set out for Egypt. But God is infinitely powerful. Had he no way of changing the king's heart? Was it not unworthy of God to flee from a weak mortal? Could he have not performed once again, this time for Jesus' sake, the miracle of the plagues with which he afflicted Egypt in order to save his people? Mary was not concerned to try to understand God's plan in dealing with her. So too, his will deserves our submission, whether or not we understand why he acts as he does. Mary does not ask whether she should have enough to eat during the long journey through the wilderness and the foreign land to which she was being sent. The God who gave the order to make the journey was powerful enough to enable her to find sustenance, though she might not see it readily. Mary was not concerned to find out whether she would have to stay in Egypt for a long period. She simply thought that she would return when God signaled the time for return. God could give Mary orders even more difficult to understand than this one. She would never lose her tranquility. And indeed, what is there that should trouble a soul that knows God is its guide? Is there perhaps some surer protection than that which divine providence offers? Prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, you bid me travel by paths I do not know. Your command is enough for me. Your will is my light and all the reason I need. Admittedly, I do not know where I am going, but I am sure that if I let myself be led by a guide as wise as you are, I shall not go astray. Although I walk in darkness, I walk with assurance, for I am sure you will not desert me. Of what use would my own weak light be on a path where you yourself are my guide, and which you order me to follow in blind obedience? You have spoken. I must act without listening to myself. We often trust entirely the advice of a man who is regarded as prudent and enlightened. Have we any reason for mistrust when you, eternal wisdom, are the one who directs us? Therefore, however surprising I may find your plans for me, I shall simply bow down before them in adoration, for your power surpasses my power to understand it. Your action, even when hidden, is no less to be adored. Your works all bear the stamp of infinite wisdom, even when their secret is not revealed. I wish, then, to be no less submissive to your commands, even when I do not understand the reason for them, than I am to the truth you have revealed to me. I do not comprehend that truth, yet I am surer of it than if I understood it by my own powers, for it is you, Lord, who have spoken.